Hi everyone, and welcome to the bonus session that I decided to do for the Risk Awareness Week. I'm broadcasting to YouTube, LinkedIn, and the Risk Awareness Week conference website. This is live, so if you're watching, ask away. This will be quite a lengthy session because I have a lot of practical ideas that I want to share and kind of just take you through the risk management journey. It will be more fun and interactive if you say hello in the comments wherever you're watching this, and if you ask questions and maybe even get a theme or some sort of topic that you want me to discuss. So introduction is over. Let me get into the kind of the actual meaty content. So today I wanted to wrap up everything we've learned over the Risk Awareness Week and really kind of map it out into some sort of practical implementation guide. If you are thinking, hi Alina, thank you for commenting. Hi Vishali, thank you for commenting from Copenhagen. Hi John. So I wanted to kind of map out all of the different ideas that have been floating and different practical examples floating around Risk Awareness Week into some sort of kind of logical theme. So if you were working in risk and you thinking of, well, where do I start? Well, this is the session. This is where I talk through step by step where you start. And if you've been working in risk for a long time, I think this will be a nice checklist for you to just cross off everything that you do anyway, and see if there is anything else, any other fresh ideas that you can borrow. So I've grouped the whole. Hi Wilson, thank you for commenting. I've grouped the whole conversation into four major blocks, and the first block, which is something not particularly typical for me, but yes, is quite important. Hi, Sabra. Risk management 1. So despite the fact that risk management, in my mind, in my experience, and in the experience of the most Risk Awareness Week speakers, risk management is a decision-making tool and basically a competency or an angle that you use to look at normal business plans, forecasts, budgets, investment decisions, strategic decisions, maintenance decisions, procurement decisions, insurance decisions. Wherever there is a decision about the future, and risk gives you kind of this additional insight. The volatility of assumptions underpinning that decision gives you a lot of additional insight that you can use to your benefit to increase the quality of decision. So despite risk management being all that, if you kind of remember some of my presentations, about 30 or 40 years ago, consultants, God bless their soul, have stolen risk management, hijacked risk management, and started commercializing it in some sort of weird astrology-like non-scientific way. And for to be kind to them, I call it risk management 1. But risk management 1 is basically astrology, nonsense, non-scientific gibberish that all of the kind of best practices, common day ERM best practices actually represent. And so while it has nothing to do with the real risk management or it's any useful, it is kind of a ticket to play. It's part of the corporate game. Auditors expect you to have something, even rating agencies. Like every single year when I was the CRO and then the head of risk of multi-billion-dollar corporations in Europe, every single year, internal auditors, external auditors, rating agencies, insurance companies, they're all asking banks, they're all asking kind of the same wrong questions, and I just call it risk management 1. So you could take a more proactive position like me. So I, for example, every year would have a meeting with the external audit partner, that would ask silly questions. So I wouldn't even talk to his teams because it would be a waste of my time. So I would just talk to the partner immediately and say, well, all of your questions regarding risk management are wrong. Here's what we actually do. Here's risk management too. And it should be more than sufficient for you to satisfy all your checklists when you're checking for, risk management effectiveness and efficiency. So you could take a proactive role like myself, but I think I'm in the minority. Most of the people choose to kind of play along and play this pretend game that risk management one is somehow meaningful. So if you are in the later category where you don't want to shake the boat, and thanks Christian, I'll even share your comment with the rest of the listeners. If you're not really into shaking boats, if you're not really into kind of having those tough conversations with the external audit partners or rating agency analysts and explain, like if you're not into teaching them every single year, and it doesn't just happen once, like you have to always do it because they clearly do not understand risk management. And so if you're not really into that, then this next section is going to be for you, because if we are going to play along and pretend risk management one is real, we might as well make it as simple and as quick as possible, because what is the worst thing that a risk manager can do is waste corporate resources on risk management one. Because in my personal experience, wasting management's resources on risk management one is absolutely criminal. And I'll give you some examples soon. Okay, so auditors love asking for policies, procedures, and all the other silly things that they think is risk management, but in fact is just risk management one. So for us, risk management one equal sign astrology, horoscopes. Not real, but you might as well have it. And so they usually ask for a few things. Number one, they usually ask for a policy. And nothing could be simpler than creating a risk management policy. And this is, again, like just listen very carefully to what I'm trying to convey, because this is risk management one. So none of this is real. None of this has any impact on practical decision making within the organization. It's just a window dressing. It's a facade. And your objective is to create the facade as pretty as possible and as quickly as possible. Only two objectives. And of course, you have to tick all the boxes. So, like if there is a specific flavor of the facade that somebody in your country expects, you want to make sure that flavor is addressed. But it's all a facade. It's not real. So, risk management policy, literally the simplest document on the planet, because I don't know if you've thought about that, but this is how I've always done, and I've passed every single risk management audit on the planet that was kind of thrown at me. And obviously, I have been audited by every big four you can imagine, and about a dozen other gurus of risk management. And so, risk management policy is very simple. Open ISO 31000, copy paste words from ISO 31000 into your policy, as long as it's about one page and it covers the principles, because ISO 31000 has the principles and has a lot of really nicely concise, beautiful words, and that's all you need. The good news is, because COSO kind of says exactly the same, like there's no fundamental methodological difference between COSO and ISO. By copy pasting from ISO, you can easily claim that it aligns 100% with COSO ERM as well. So risk management policy, first piece of paper, single page preferably. If you could, like, if you somehow fit it on 2 pages, that's also fine, but don't be stupid. Don't create like a 5-page or 10-page document. I've seen a lot of companies do that, and that's just absolute insanity. Again, remember, this policy is not real. It's not actually used for anything. By the way, we did have a policy. We obviously never used it for anything, because I'll explain how risk management is actually done in practice in the following kind of chapter of my presentation. So risk management policy, very simple. Copy paste the principles, copy paste some other beautiful words about risk being an integral part of decision making, blah blah blah, and that's it. Done. Tick the box. Let me just quickly respond to the question or comment from Alina. Um, yeah, thanks. I agree. Abilities is I'm not sure what you mean by abilities, because it could be like they don't have time or they don't have the resources. I think it's a little bit more dramatic than that. I think they don't have the competencies, which is what makes me very sad, because they want to talk about risk all the time, and because risk management one has been solved by big four consultants for such a long time. Every auditor on the planet, like I can guarantee, every auditor on the planet thinks they can do like risk management is easy and they can do it, because to them risk management is having a conversation, an interview, and then putting some qualitative risk statements into a risk register form, and then having a workshop to rank them like likelihood and consequence. Well, obviously none of this has anything to do with risk management. um, so yeah, yeah, thanks, we're on the same page. Okay, Mohammed is asking a very good question. So, what is the content of a risk management policy? Okay, let me again repeat this very slowly. Open ISO 31000. It has a section called Principles. Paraphrase the principles. That's it. And put a little introduction and maybe some sort of summary at the end. That is it. That is your risk management policy. Paraphrase the principles from ISO 31000. Done. Um, and have like a nice introduction that all the policies have. So that's document number one. Tick the box. Document number two. Some organizations are asking for a risk management framework document. Again, aligned with ISO and COSO. Framework is supposedly like the same as policy, but slightly more detailed with the methodology. I actually never had one. So I deleted and cancelled these such framework documents every time I would join a new organization, because as I would explain in the next chapter, it actually is absolute insanity to have a single framework methodology document, because you have different methodologies for market risk and credit risk, and even within operational risk you have different methodologies for environmental safety, um, production. In procurement you have different types of risk. Like every organization has like 5 or 10 different risk managements. In investment process you have a different risk management. In business planning you have a different kind of risk management. The math behind all of these risk managements is kind of the same, but that you have like 5 or 10 different risk managements, and trying to artificially consolidate it into a single document is really a waste of time. If anything, we did once have like a governance model, basically like a high level overview of what risk management philosophy within the organization is, with like snippets from market risk methodology, credit risk methodology, operational risk methodology, liquidity risk methodology. But the only reason why we've done it, like it wasn't a um, static document that needs to be approved. The only reason we've done that kind of model overview was to present to the audit committee and to the board and to the shareholders, explaining kind of the direction that risk management is going to take. So my advice, even for risk management one, to not have a risk management framework document at all ever. But again, if you're not really into rocking the boat too much, and if you don't want to have those conversations, and you will have to have those conversations all the time with the auditors, because they will come like every year, they will go, well, where's your framework document? And every year you have to explain that it's a stupid question and you shouldn't be asking that. And in fact, there are 5 other documents that are more relevant than a single artificial risk management framework document. But if you don't want to have that conversation, just create one. And again, by copy pasting words from ISO and COSO, you should have more than sufficient information to create this artificial document. Again, remember, none of this is real. Whatever you put in it has zero impact on the actual risk management that you do within the company. So it literally doesn't matter what you put in the framework document, as long as you can claim that it aligns with ISO and COSO. So because that's literally the only thing that external stakeholders care about when they review your risk management. And then the final point, and this is actually very important. In some countries, for example, in Germany, you're expected to quantify overall risk exposure and represent it as a risk profile, like a loss exceedance curve or a histogram, some sort of quantitative measure of risk. In some of the other European countries, the Ministry of Finance expects you to have a tax risk register. In some of the other countries, the Ministry of Environment expects you to have environmental risk registers. And then now there is kind of this drive for an ESG risk register. All of these things are completely stupid and have zero practical value. But if you are expected by a regulator, especially if it's a law, to have something as part of risk management one, you must do it. Like there's no, even though again, I am crazy. So I have had conversations with Ministry of Economics and Ministry of Finance and Central Bank saying, do not issue that regulation, that legislation, because it's stupid that you're asking for a risk register of something or other. And we've even blocked one, maybe two legislations on that. But then we weren't able to convince them on about 5 other legislations that they didn't ask us on 5 more that they've just issued. So sometimes it's just there's no point arguing with ministries, and they obviously have no clue about risk management. So it's just easier to do whatever they ask. Unfortunately, it's all risk management one, and you can't kind of doing a risk register for ESG. You can't really reuse it for actual decision making within the organization. So it's a bit of a waste of effort, but it's part of those kind of it's part of playing the corporate game. You just have to close your eyes, pretend that it's real, and just do it. And thanks, Sammy. I completely agree. It's one of these things. I have been lucky enough to have management that was actually, I don't know, I don't want to use the word clever, but the management that was kind of pragmatic and real enough to very quickly realize that all of this is complete window dressing and had nothing to do with how they actually make decisions. And so they actually did not like seeing any risk registers because they knew it was a waste of time, and it was insulting to them to waste their time on reviewing different risk registers. And so management kind of sleeps better not seeing all this artificial risk management one, but the board and the audit committee and some of the external stakeholders, they certainly sleep much better. Okay, so Susan is asking, if this is the case, how do you collect the risk information? Well, stay tuned, because in the next chapter we will start discovering how we actually do risk management, because none of this is risk management. This is just window dressing, risk management one, fairy tale stuff. This is not real. Okay, next, just to wrap up on risk management one. So most of the time you can get away with just a policy, maybe a framework document. Like with those 2 documents, you can get away with that. Sometimes, for example, like in Germany, you are expected to develop a risk profile, basically to either quantify your overall risk exposure, or to show how risks affect objectives, or whatever Tim Leach calls objective-centric risk management. Again, none of this is real. It's all risk management one. So your key objective, your key purpose in doing this is you want to have something, and that something has to look pretty, but you have to make sure it takes as little time as physically possible, because none of this is real. So if you have a strategic risk register, it doesn't matter whether you have 5 columns or 10 columns or 50 columns, your overall strategic risk register is as useless, whatever your kind of your effort that you put in into creating it. So if you spend a day creating your strategic risk register or high level risk profile, or 6 months creating the same strategic risk register with a lot more detail, it had zero value before. It still has zero value. The only and okay, I'm a little bit exaggerating. The value is not zero. The value is like 5 out of 100, because disclosure is still important, and showing that risk register and sending it to the central bank once a year, or sending it to the central bank once a quarter, or showing it to the audit committee once a year, it has value, and the value is keeping them happy. And what's the ultimate purpose of risk management one? It's keeping them happy, and making sure that they sleep well, and they're relaxed, and they're satisfied, and they're just generally comfortable, I think, is the word, comfortable. So yes, Sammy, thank you. I agree with you. Documenting risks in the risk register is not really risk management or managing risk. So at some stage, or in some countries, in some geographies, or some regulatory environments, you will be expected to develop a risk profile. A risk profile is basically a risk register, a high level risk register, and you do not want to spend too much time on going into a lot of detail. The more like, you don't need to have a lot of risks in your high level risk register, because your risk profile is judged on its existence. Do you have one? Tick. Nobody really cares in risk management one world. Nobody really cares if it's a big or a small, if it's many risks or many columns in the risk register. I mean, without a doubt, the stupidest thing I have ever seen in my life is a large multi-billion-dollar oil and gas company in Eastern Europe creating a risk register which had 53 columns. That is without the doubt the stupidest thing I've ever seen. I mean, the guys that were developing the methodology behind it, I think they should be prosecuted, because this is criminal. This is absolutely criminal, because risk management one has to be quick, painless, beautiful. Quick, painless, beautiful. I think that's the motto of risk management one profile. So if you are required to do a risk register, do watch my first session at the Risk Awareness Week. And Risk Awareness Week, of course, you can find, if you're watching this on LinkedIn or YouTube, Risk Awareness Week is still at 2022.riskawarenessweek.com, and all the replays are available there. And the first, literally, if you go to replays, like watch the workshops page, the first workshop is my session that I did last Monday, where I talk about 3 levels of risk analysis: basic, standardized, and advanced. Again, don't need to recreate the wheel. We just borrow the same approach that banks have been using for years under Basel regulations. So we also have 3 levels of risk analysis, and basic is all you need at the risk management 1 level, because it's more than sufficient. My key, so basically, to get a risk profile, you need to do 2 steps. Create a risk register, make it super high level, super simple, make it quantitative. Step number 2, make it quantitative. Some software packages like Archer Insight can actually do it at the push of a button. You take your normal risk register and then just converts it into a quantitative risk register, and it gives you a histogram, your risk profile, a distribution of your risk exposure. You can represent it as a histogram, or you can represent it as a loss exceedance curve, and that gives you all the valuable insights. You can prioritize using tornado diagram instead of a heat map, which is completely flawed and a waste of time. And it gives you expected losses, unexpected losses. It gives you a tail. So it gives you so expected losses. You use that for budgeting and planning purposes. Unexpected losses is your VAR. You use that for reporting purposes and prioritizing purposes. And then the tail you can use that for insurance purposes. Again, all of this is high level, so you wouldn't really use any of this information for planning, budgeting, or insurance purposes just now, because you would want, for those specific decisions, you would actually want to do proper risk analysis. But it looks really, really good. A quantitative risk profile, quantitative risk register, it is probably the sexiest thing a risk manager can can come up with. So if you are, for some weird reason, required to do a risk register within the organization, it better bloody be quantitative, because it's so easy to convert any risk register on the planet into a quantitative risk register. Thank you for your question. Here's the address for the annual virtual risk awareness week. And I highly recommend anybody who's watching this right now live, or you'll be watching this later in repeat, I very much recommend signing up to that online conference. It's virtual, so you don't have to be live to watch it. You can watch it on any device at any time, and replays are available forever. There are 40 workshops on different, like, proper risk management, quantitative risk management, 2 topics. So if you're wondering, well, how do you convert a risk register from qualitative to quantitative, when you can just watch Hans Lisso's session and download his template. Or if you want to know how do you represent risks using a tornado diagram, you just watch Hernan's session and download his template and you use that. And there are obviously a lot of sessions on bow ties and risk appetite, but I'll be referencing them throughout the conversation. So let me just kind of run this here, and well, I don't know, it doesn't look pretty. Risk profile. This is your second last section within risk management 1. You may be required to have a risk register. If you do, I mean, if you can get out of it and don't do it because it's a waste of time. But if you can't, if you must have a risk register because somebody expects you to, it's 21st century. We have all the technology we need. There are even software packages like Archer Insight that automatically do it for you. Have a quantitative risk register. For goodness sake, it's about time we just stopped with colors and words and numbers. You can't multiply high and medium. It's just it's year 7 math. Bad math from year 7. Don't do it. The final thing in risk management 1, sometimes some external organizations expect you to have some sort of risk appetite statements, documents, words, and again, that's really easy, because there's a very simple answer in risk management 1 for it. First, if you are still confused on what is risk appetite versus tolerance, capacity, like all these buzzwords. By the way, even though I am quite young, I actually am old enough to remember when Oliver Wyman, one of the consulting companies in risk, commercialized risk appetite, because risk appetite existed forever. And then somebody turned it and decided to create a risk appetite statement, which, by the way, is the stupidest idea ever. And again, zero practical value. But we've now live in the new world where risk appetite is something that we have to waste our time doing. So if you're still confused about some of the terminology, what is what and how to use it, make sure when you sign up for the Risk Awareness Week, make sure you find David Vose's workshop, where he, I think, does a wonderful job explaining it. So just follow his lead on that. From a practical point of view, what is risk appetite? Risk appetite is 3 things. Number 1, different legislations already set different appetites. Anti-money laundering, safety, environmental, there are limits and zero tolerances that have been imposed on the organization. And all of these limits are already documented in different board level policies and procedures. So technically speaking, you don't have to do anything. You just have to keep in mind that, whenever your policy or some sort of guideline within the organization says we have zero tolerance for fraud, well, that's your risk appetite against fraud. And whatever your safety policy says against the safety and well-being of employees, well, that's your appetite for that. So all of this has been documented well before kind of risk managers arrived in shining armor on the scene and decided to own the concept of risk appetite. So that's number one. Different legislations already imposed, and all of that has been documented and written within the organization. So there's pretty much nothing you need to do about that. The second part of risk appetite is this kind of gentleman's agreement between the shareholders, the board, and the management. And that is usually represented by deal limits. For example, anything below 10 million can be decided by the CEO. Anything above 10 million needs to go to the board. Anything above 100 million needs to go to like a special committee within the board. And so these limits, again, all you need to do is to identify them, see where they're documented, know where they are, and refer to them if you need from time to time. And so that's your second type of risk appetite. Again, the legal team and the corporate secretary have probably documented all of these kind of limits and parameters long before risk management ever needed to be involved. Maybe on some of the specific decisions, you can add a little bit of value by saying we will invest in new markets, but only, and you can add like a little sentence, but only after a thorough risk analysis has been performed and the risk is not exceeding, and the risk is considered, moderate or something. And then you can, figure out what the definition of moderate would be for your organization. So that's the second example of risk appetite. Again, most of the time you actually, as the risk manager, actually don't have to do anything because it's already been done by somebody much more competent within the organization, usually corporate secretary or the legal team. And then, of course, there is the from your risk management one perspective, I don't really see a benefit of collecting all of these appetites from different existing documents and putting it into a single risk appetite statement. I never did that. I actually did the opposite. I just referred, like whenever somebody asked me about risk appetite, I said, well, risk appetite regarding safety is in this document, risk appetite regarding investment is in this document, risk appetite regarding planning and budgeting is in this document, and so on. So I always, whenever I had a choice of creating a new risk document or making mild changes into existing corporate documents, somebody else's documents, or not even having to do any changes and just referring to those documents, I have always in my career as a CRO, as a head of risk, I always used the second option. I never created separate risk documents. I always made changes to somebody else's existing documents. So as far as risk appetite goes, most of the time you don't have to do anything about it at all. All you have to do is find where different appetites are within the existing documents, read through a few policies. Basically, take all the documents that have been approved by the board, and you will identify different limits, no-goes, zero tolerances, statements, qualifiers, and all of them collectively is your company's risk appetite. You may discover that there are some important decisions that have absolutely no limits and no rules. And then the risk manager's job may be to kind of to suggest that why don't we incorporate some of the rules around a particular new decision. And finally, the third type of risk appetite is whenever somebody is making a decision, we actually use risk management too to show that for most decisions, there is no single best answer. For example, when you have a portfolio of projects, there's no one best combination of projects. There are always different bad and different good combinations. There are multiple good combinations. And the kind of the preference is really subject to the decision maker's appetite for risk. For example, I remember we were we had an investment of whether we wanted to build a new chemical plant. And it was a choice between building a single line with large capacity or two smaller capacity lines in parallel. So basically just choosing different technological options for the plant configuration. And both of those options are good. Like one is no better than the other. They have different risks. One has more operational risk, the other one has more market risk. They're just different kinds of risk. Like the one is not better than the other. They're just different flavors of risk. And so for us, the third instance of risk appetite was whenever somebody is making a big decision, we would present option A and option B with the underlying upsides and downsides, the risks, and then let the decision maker choose, because it's not for you as the risk manager to say one is better than the other. Like sometimes some choices are just bad in all scenarios. But most of the time, some choices are better 90% of the time, and 10% of the time, the other choices are better. And depending on what the kind of the future view, the view of the future for the shareholder is, then he may decide what is kind of more suitable for him. So for me, the third type of risk appetite, which doesn't need to be documented in the risk appetite statement, is whenever there is an important decision to be made, don't present a single scenario, present various options, show optionality, and highlight that there are different risks associated with the different options. So that's, in my mind, kind of the practical application of how we used risk appetite. And that wraps up our risk management one conversation. I mean, congratulations. With very little effort, a lot of beautiful pictures. And by the way, do look at my first session on Risk Awareness Week that I talked about different levels of risk analysis, and I talked about the basic, because I actually show a lot of beautiful pictures, and I think I have one of the pictures a little bit later as well. You can actually generate a lot of beautiful pictures for risk management one. And that's it. You're done with risk management one. You now have kind of a nifty package that whoever comes and asks you about risk management, you can show them, and they will be very satisfied and happy. Now, let's talk about real risk management. So we finished with window dressing. It's part of the game, and I feel sad that we have to do it, but it's easier to create a quantitative risk register than do no risk register at all sometimes. Again, I did not have a risk register, overall strategic risk register. I deleted it. We used to have it. I deleted it because it was completely unnecessary. And I had many other risk managements too. And I was able to illustrate to anyone who would ask that we have some of the most sophisticated risk managements on the planet. And by the way, this has been confirmed by the judges, because last year I was named the best risk manager in Europe, and we've got a special honorable award from RIMS in US. So both in Europe and US, whatever we did was recognized as one of the best risk managements on the planet at the time. So yeah, seems to work. But if you do have to do a risk register, might as well do a quantitative one. And Heidi is saying window dressing is still needed. Unfortunately, yes. Again, sometimes I feel adventurous, and I have absolutely no problem fighting external auditors and insurance companies on their questionnaires and just refusing to show them what they want instead of showing them what I think they should have asked in the first place. But not everybody is adventurous, and I don't actually invite you to be adventurous. I think it's a waste of nerves and time. It's just easier to do window dressing. So, risk management 2. Let's talk about some real stuff now. So first, risk management 2, the underlying idea behind risk management 2 is that risk is a decision-making tool. Risk analysis supports decision-making. So what I would normally do when I join a new organization, And this is exactly what I did 3 years ago when I joined Eurochem, and this is exactly what I did 7 years ago when I joined the private equity fund. Um, and I would pick a pilot. I know it's a very soft phrase, but I would pick some sort of business process where I could see there could be an immediate and meaningful impact from risk analysis. For example, in my previous role, I picked investment decisions because that was the core function of the organization. And so they used to make investment decisions by adding a colorful heat map to the investment on one of the slides, like slide 150, and saying, well, by the way, here are 5 high risks that are associated with this deal. Be mindful of that. So we replaced that with some quantitative risk analysis, at least for the bigger deals. And we actually showed how those risks affect the cash flow and how they affect the NPV, did NPV at risk. And that was one example. In the previous job, we um, in the previous job, we selected insurance as another pilot because there was a hypothesis that we were paying, and we had portfolio like nothing excessive, but like 20-30 million dollars in insurance premiums per year. Nothing groundbreaking. And there was a hypothesis from the CFO that we needed to investigate and figure it out because the insurance coverage was not fit to the underlying risks of the organization. We were insuring wrong things, we were underinsuring some things, overinsuring others, and we were definitely overpaying for whatever we were insuring. So we took that as the pilot. And we took one renewal at the time, one insurance type at the time, and then we investigated it, created, quantified the risk profile for each of the insurance types, even created a calculator for it. So I actually have a whole session on sharing an example because we ended up saving $13 million, which was approximately, I think, 40% of our annual insurance budget for one of the companies. And I think this is one of the reasons why I was named the best risk manager in Europe last year, because that was quite a groundbreaking saving, and we didn't do it by reducing limits. We actually increased limits quite dramatically on some lines. We increased limits by 7 times. We increased limits by twice or 3 times on other lines. We didn't really touch the deductible. Sometimes we increased the deductibles, but that had very minor effect on savings. So it was pretty groundbreaking stuff. Like we actually improved the quality of the wording of the policies, made them broader, not narrower, just through quantitative risk analysis, like very simple math, very simple methodology. And so I'm sharing that part of the methodology in my other Risk Awareness Week session, which I did Wednesday last week. And so make sure you rewatch the replay because there's I still think it's pretty amazing stuff that we've done because it wasn't a fluke, it wasn't once off. We replicated it in Europe, London, US, Latin America, Eastern Europe, Asia, different brokers, different underwriters. Every time we would attempt to have a saving, like the savings totaled 13 million, but we saved 5 million on one, 1.2 million on another, 3 million on another, half a million on something else. Like it was always amazing. And do you watch that workshop? If you're on the Risk Awareness Week website right now, just click on watch the workshops and Control F, look for my name, and there's a case study that I share, pretty detailed, and I'm actually showing a calculator that we ended up doing because the math behind that specific decision was pretty simple. And that's another important point that I want to kind of deviate here, because risk management 1 requires quite basic competencies. You have to talk clearly, you have to be a good communicator, you have to show leadership skills, and you have to be able to color beautiful pictures. So not a very unique skill set. What I'm trying to say, knowing how to color different boxes is not that complicated. Of course, you do need to have your leadership skills to communicate with everybody else, and you need to sell it to the external auditors and to the rating agencies. So you need to be a good communicator. But other than that, no technical skills required. Like, you just color boxes. It's really simple things. Like, you don't need to have a math degree. However, once we start going into the risk management 2 territory, you literally have 4 options. And you tell me if you can think about other options, because I wrote an interesting article yesterday. I don't know if you saw it. 5 concerns every risk manager should have. And when I was writing it, I thought about 4 options. And you tell me if you can think of more. So option number 1 is hire a quant. And this is literally what I did. I actually hired 2 quants in my risk team that was responsible for insurance and operational and investment risk. They were the kind of the engines building the risk models for various decisions. And I was kind of the mastermind, figuring out which decisions we need a model for, and then figuring out the overall structure, kind of mapping out the model. Like, you can think of, I would be the person who would build the influence diagram or decision tree, and then I had 2 math geniuses that would actually put a stochastic model on top of my decision tree, or a bow tie. And so that's option 1. Option 2 is you can outsource the quantitative risk analysis, and this is what basically I do now. Since I resigned after the war started, I've been kind of freelancing, mainly focusing on Risk Awareness Week, but I've been freelancing and building some models for organizations. So you can outsource quantitative risk. Like, you don't have to do it yourself. Option 3 is you can actually find software that automates the mathematical engine behind the calculator. So there are software packages that have the calculators built in. So for example, Archer Insight can press a button, convert your risk register into a quantitative risk register, generate the loss exceedance curve. Or it can, you build a bow tie, and it can quantify the bow tie. Or you actually have, like, we're actually working on that at the moment, and hopefully it will be implemented as a module in the near future. You can actually plug in your claims data, and the calculator automatically fits the distribution, calculates the exceedance curves, calculates different deductibles and fair prices, and then you can plug in your different quotes that you received from the underwriters, and it actually recalculates the risk profile based on the quotes, and it gives you kind of the preferred options. It gives you a few options with ranking on which one seems to be a better coverage for your risk exposure. So option 3 is find a software that had math geniuses behind the scenes who automated the mathematical side, and then you can just kind of plug in the basic numbers, some of your assumptions and statistical data that every organization has, and it gives you the outputs. And option 4 is become a math genius yourself. And I hope Risk Awareness Week is a nice stepping stone to help you towards that journey, because I've spent a lot of effort trying to gather as many amazing speakers as possible who bring their expertise and show how they do it. And some of them show their code, some of them show their models, and you can download and sample the models and kind of try and download the code and try it yourself. So for example, I used the first 3. So I don't consider, even though I have an actual degree in statistics, and I'm probably better than average at quantitative risk. At least I understand the distributions quite well, and I can definitely read them, and I can talk to them, and I can set the task for the modelers to do. and I can validate and backtest the models, but I wouldn't consider myself a math genius. And that's why I hired math geniuses. I outsourced, for example, I outsource a lot of engineering work to actual risk engineers, and I use software that automates the math for me. Yazan is asking a very interesting question. What is the reason for absence of risk management in government institutions, public sector? So the answer, I think, is very simple. You are thinking of government in your specific country because, and hence you're making an assumption that every government is as immature in risk management as what you observed. That is actually not the case. If you look at Canadian government and the regulations that they issue, or if you look at Australian government and New Zealand governments, and the regulations and the frameworks and the methodologies that they're using. For example, I think in one of the states in Australia, in Victoria, I can't remember if it's federal or if it's just Victorian. There is under the Ministry of Finance, there is VMIA, a whole section within the Ministry of Finance. I think it's Victorian specific, that is basically responsible for upskilling and educating and providing methodology for governments in state of Victoria on the topics of risk management, business continuity, and insurance. And even though they started really, really strong, and they kind of stayed at risk management one, it's like the prettiest risk management one you can find, but probably still risk management one. So it's not the absence is not the right word. Governments in many parts of the world are using quite sophisticated risk management because, for example, I wrote a maturity model for a state auditor, a auditor general in one of the Eastern European countries many years ago that they used to then audit different ministries on risk management. And so absence is not the right word. It exists. Unfortunately, most of the risk management within the government organizations is risk management one. So it's basically do a pretty risk register. Most of the time, it's not even quantitative risk register, which in my mind is just an absolute waste of time. So yeah, I don't know why they don't move beyond risk management one. Maybe because government is kind of really playing in that window dressing space. Yeah, thanks, Sammy. It is in Victoria. So maybe because kind of government is really playing that window dressing game, and they just need evidence of presence of something. And most organizations, like for example, I used to do a lot of risk management for New South Wales State Parliament in Australia. I did a lot of risk management work for City of Sydney. So risk management in many government agencies in developed countries exists at the federal, state, and even local level. I did a lot of risk management for catchments, so like for like really local governments. So yeah, it exists. However, I wish it was risk management two. It is still very much risk management one. The only exception that I'm kind of proud of observing and being close to it is in New Zealand. Whenever you are participating in the government-private partnership, and you want to build some sort of infrastructure project together with the government funding, Ministry of Finance has a methodology that requires you to model schedule and cost risks, and you have to give them like P95, P5, like they request normal risk metrics. So I was very delighted to see that it exists. All right. So the first point on risk management one, integrating into decisions. And I still have a lot of things to say. So you can go grab a coffee, you can come back, I'll still be talking, because I just wanted to kind of pile everything into this conversation. And if you're tired already, and we've been online for 55 minutes, I know it's a big task listening to me. You can just rewatch it later, because this will be available as a recording both on the Risk Academy, on the Risk Awareness website, on YouTube, LinkedIn. YouTube, um, Risk Academy YouTube is probably these. By the way, thank you for Monty to becoming a member on the YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It's really easy to find. You go youtube.com/@ like in the email Risk Academy, and it finds the channel. So first point that I wanted to touch on, just integrating into some of the decisions. No, we don't integrate into every decision. That's way too complicated and way too time consuming. We're implementing into some of the decisions, and we usually start with one decision, like one very pragmatic where we can immediately make some money for the shareholders. Again, I am a big believer that whatever quantitative risk analysis we do, it better save some money, because otherwise what's the point? It's actually quite time consuming and takes a lot of effort, and unless it pays for itself, it seems like a very silly thing, silly thing to do. Okay, so the point number one is to integrate into decisions. You need to either have some quants in your team, outsource the quant, use the software that automates the quant, or become a quant yourself. There's really no kind of dancing around it. If you don't have none of that, then kind of move on to the next stage, or start with something else. And I suspect you would find it difficult to do proper risk analysis. That being said, in my experience, it is really a no-brainer. So for example, I hired risk engineers to walk with me and the team around all of our chemical plants and go into every room and investigate every piece of equipment. It wasn't cheap, but it was less than 0.5% of the money we saved on the actual insurance, literally 2 months later. So in my mind, outsourcing quantitative risk analysis, or buying a license for the software that does risk analysis, is such a no-brainer, because the cost is minuscule compared to the savings that you can get. Like we saved millions of dollars, and just because we spent tens of thousands on some service providers to collect data for us so we could quantify it, and I hired an extra quant and paid his salaries and all the admin costs and his bonuses, all of that was nothing compared to just one insurance renewal. Like literally within a week, we paid for all of this for the next 10 years. Like we paid for all of his salaries for the next 10 years within a week. So in my mind, quantitative risk analysis is kind of really a no-brainer. You just maybe it's probably difficult to imagine if you've never done this before. And the good news is you have plenty of people at the Risk Awareness Week, all the speakers. You can just ask, like if you look at the workshop and somebody tells you a nice example, reach out to the speaker, ask them about their experience. Because you can ask me a lot of questions about insurance, for example, or operational risk or investment risk. There's a good chance I've done most of that, and we saved actually a lot of money. Now, the second big choice on this slide is every risk manager has to make a decision. Do they keep the risk analysis within their team, or do they build the templates, build the tools, and give it back to the actual decision makers, to the personnel? For example, insurance decisions we kept. Environmental decisions, we build like water pollution, air pollution. We actually built calculators for quantifying those risk exposures. We gave it back to the environmental team. We give them we're giving them training. We found a couple of people who got it. Like we gave training to maybe like 15 people, and we knew that 2 people got it. And we just kind of build the relationship with these two people, and we gave them back and let them do their own risk analysis. So it's a very important choice that every risk manager needs to make. Whenever you implement a decision, at some stage you have to decide: do you keep the risk analysis yourself? And it has a significant resource implications, because then if they make this decision every day, that means you have to generate risk analysis every day. If they make the decision, and then it means you have to automate it because you can't physically do risk analysis. So, for example, market and credit risk, not my team, but the team next to me, the other risk management team responsible for credit risk and another risk management team responsible for market risk, they kept the quantification. And then, of course, they had to automate it completely, because it is impossible to recalculate all these VARs on a daily basis and do it accurately manually, because of the volume of transactions happening globally. So the second big decision is: do you keep the risk analysis or do you give it back? There are pros and cons on each one. My general preference has always been: give it back as much as possible. Let the other teams do their risk analysis. As long as you've built them the techniques, the tools, the templates, and you've trained them, they should be able to do it. Then, of course, they can come and ask you for methodological advice. But I actually kept very few risks that I would be responsible for quantifying. Okay, the next big step in risk management too is start playing a role in planning, maybe budgeting, although I'm kind of less optimistic about budgeting, because budgeting is usually quite political and interpersonal. It's not really process driven, it's more personality driven. So I wouldn't necessarily touch budgeting if it wasn't like a very clear cut, simple process. I would stick with planning, like business planning or forecasting. And so there's a big chunk of work that risk managers can do. And this is quite a lengthy project, so take your time. First is replacing all of the assumptions from point estimates to ranges, replacing some of the scenarios that the finance or strategic team usually runs with more sophisticated kind of correlated modeling. We have sessions on how to do this at the Risk Awareness Week. So you don't have to recreate the wheel. And this is, again, a very important message. Everything that I'm talking about here is not new or innovative in any way. Most of the techniques used that I am talking about here have been created 70 or 100. Some of the methodologies have been created like 500 years ago. All of this is very, very old and basic for a quantitative person. If you think that this feels somehow new or not very clear or complex, it just means that you haven't done it before and you don't have experience. You're probably not a quant. Anybody with a quantitative risk analysis can kind of for them, that's like easy. The first thing they can do for breakfast. It's just the easiest thing they can think of. So you don't have to struggle. You just have to find the person who's done it and then replicate their approach. And this is why Risk Awareness Week is so powerful, because I found the people who've done it millions of times for you, and then they illustrate how you can do it in real life. So, watch Sam Savage, watch Hank Krania, and Brian Part and I always do sessions on the topic. Doug Hubbard, of course, is a mastermind of that. Max Henry, and all of these gentlemen have workshops at 2019 Risk Awareness Week, 2020 Risk Awareness Week, 2021 Risk Awareness Week, and 2022 Risk Awareness Week. Start with 2022 and then just scale back to the older sessions, because they're just as relevant as they were before. Because this can be then like all of the simulations, they can be used for setting performance targets, stress testing, scenario analysis. Yes, thank you, Sammy, and Benoit, of course, as well. He's very much illustrating every year how to use quantitative risk analysis to improve your planning and forecasting. And his last session is how to survive a zombie apocalypse. It is, of course, a joking theme, but a very real methodology behind it. And it just basically says, well, if you need to plan for a new volatile environment, well, how would you do it using risk analysis? And he actually illustrates literally step by step, actually showing even some of his coding on how he does it. So next big chunk of work within risk management too is start integrating elements of quantitative risk analysis into various planning practices. Then, once we kind of understand and we've chosen our priorities in risk management too, and we understand where we want to go, for example, we want to save some money on insurance, we want to change how procurement team does accreditation for new vendors, or how they get vendor selection and invitation for the tenders, or we chosen equipment maintenance as our priority area, or we just want to take a business plan and make it better. By the way, Hans Liso literally did a workshop on how to use your risk register to improve your business plan. So you kind of how do you link your quantitative risk register to your business plan, and like he did it in the easiest way physically possible. 2022.riskawarenessweek.com. Watch his session, and you can actually download the template and try and do it yourself. But you don't have to do it yourself. You can just ask somebody to do it for you. Just keep that in mind as well. And so once you've kind of chosen what is going to be your application of risk management, of your real risk management, how you're going to take the risks that you see and take of the assumptions that the management is making and convert them into a risk model, and then use that risk model to drive the business plan or the budget or the investment proposal or the maintenance budget or the procurement budget. Once you've chosen your application of risk analysis, the next thing is to keep in mind that no matter how well you do the math side, on the other part of the equation are people. And culture is absolutely fundamental to the implementation and the application of risk analysis, because it's actually really easy to convince somebody to do quantitative risk analysis, especially if you're doing the quantitative part. It's really easy when you're in the room, but literally the second you step out of the room, they will forget completely and not do it at the next decision. So you could have done the most amazing risk analysis on the deal. And I remember we were buying a mine in Brazil, did some amazing risk analysis there. And literally the next deal, if we weren't kind of present in the room, they probably wouldn't even remember to do the risk analysis. So it's about kind of the mindset as much as it is about the process. So few ideas on how I've tried to change the culture, and there's no golden recipe. It's my general theme behind building a risk culture within the organization is million droplets to the brain. So you actually have no idea which one will work. You just kind of do multiple things consistently all the time, and one of them will grow. So here's what I've done. And by the way, if you've done something different to reinforce risk culture within the organization, share in the comments. Write what you've done. I have sometimes taken position descriptions and tweaked the responsibilities a little bit to include risk-based decision making, planning, risk-based performance management, just kind of reinforce that ownership for making decisions only after risks have been carefully considered. So that's small thing. Yeah, some HR feel pressures about it because they're lazy and they don't understand it. Some HR feel indifferent and they just let you kind of do it as part of some other changes that they're doing it. Some legal teams feel threatened by it. Some legal teams don't care. Just see how it kind of plays out. It's not a deal breaker if you can't do it or if it's just too difficult. Normally, what I've done is I just waited for somebody else to initiate some bigger changes, and then I would just kind of jump on the tail and do the risk changes as part of that. Then the next thing that I usually do is I take all the committee charters, and again I add like audit committee, different board level committees, management committees, safety committees, and I would just read through the charters and see if there's anything I can add to again reinforce the responsibility for risk-based decision making, planning, performance management. If there is, great, again, initiate the change. If there isn't, fine. Then the third thing that I would always do is some sort of risk management training for decision makers. I always record it and make it available online on the intranet. Some of the sessions I even made available publicly on YouTube channels and corporate YouTube channels. So it's like there's no restrictions. Like if you do some sort of nice, concise session on why risk thinking is important when making decisions and why risk taking is actually a competency that needs to be trained, and all of the kind of story on cognitive biases, system 1, system 2, and different techniques that CIA uses for improving the quality of decision making. It's a very kind of compelling, nice education. Executives, I wouldn't say I don't know whether they love it, because executives will never admit that they loved something, but I got positive vibes from those conversations, and a lot of people would come and see me afterwards saying, now I understand what risk management is all about, and we have this kind of complex, uncertain problem. Can we borrow some of your quants to build a risky model for it and help us make decisions? So you actually built a number of risky models for logistical problems where there was uncertainty, how many bad weather days, what the wave's going to do, the speed of loading, uploading, offloading, the delays on the train tracks, and like we could actually model all of that, and that's a very important decision making model. But the most powerful thing that I've ever done in terms of raising up competencies, risk management competencies, is of course incorporating risk as a competency, as an element into all other various existing business training programs. And that's why corporate universities are usually my best friends, because I just talk to them, well, what sort of trainings are they planning to do? Like, especially if they have leadership programs. There are large organizations in Europe that have had their kind of gold reserve stuff, and they have like leadership programs where they've outsourced the risk element to us for the last, like, I don't know, 3-4 years. So every month we would do like a little module on risk within their leadership program for all the newly promoted personnel and just new hires and everybody else. So incorporating risk competencies into existing training programs is super powerful. Communication channels is the next kind of big focus area. And to me, risk culture has always been kind of this separate focus area. So I would actually have like a plan called my risk culture program. And that would have a number of initiatives that I had a separate person focusing on and making sure that we integrate into different training programs. The key is that the business doesn't really kind of expect you to be there. So you have to constantly reminding them, like constantly remind the different HR teams and corporate universities that whenever they create a new training program, there has to be an element of risk in it, because they will forget, and they always do forget, and you have to constantly remind them and just be on their tail. So communication is the next area. I found that having a risk committee, even though it sounds like it's risk management 1, and it's just a facade. I did find that having a risk committee and being a secretary in it is actually quite a powerful communication channel. I was able to use it for getting validation and feedback on all of my methodologies, and it was a nice platform to talk about risks. So I've tried it a couple of times, and it actually proved to be quite a valuable exercise. I was not a big fan before I tried it once, but as soon as I tried it, I kind of thought, well, why not? Um, then, of course, part of communication is just integrating risk information into meeting agendas, speaking opportunities, writing texts, speeches for executives, like basically trying to put little risk messages into every opportunity you can identify. Um, Running corporate events, I have, for example, Risk Awareness Week is kind of, or was kind of, my corporate risk event, because I would give free access to all employees, and dozens and dozens of people joined. And I know another very successful oil company in Siberia where they created such a powerful internal corporate risk event that became the biggest risk conference in the country, and they have thousands of employees joining in every year um, to learn and exchange experiences about risk taking. So communication, super important. Um, Disclosure and reporting, again, all part of the game, because you never know what will have the most amazing effect on the risk culture. And so, for example, I have a lot of friends in risk management who put zero effort into their annual reports. They just let the corporate secretary write it. I took a very different approach. I wrote every single section related to risk management in the annual report. So, do have a look at last year's EUROCAM annual report, for example, and see what I usually say in annual reports, because I actually took a lot of effort. By the way, I killed heat map immediately, and despite the fact that at least 3 people came back to me saying, "But having a heat map in the annual report is best practice," I said, "No, it isn't," and we did something significantly different. And I actually tried to describe what we actually do in terms of risk-based decision making as much as possible, without going bananas, because annual reports are reviewed by people who expect to see certain things, because annual reports are risk management one. But then, of course, on the corporate intranet, we were working on the whole page with trainings, all the templates, contacts, dashboards for the key risk exposures like credit VAR, market VAR, operational VAR, and some of the insurance statistics. So that, again, in my mind, that's a given that must be in place. On the external corporate website, publishing risk management policy is usually a good idea. Some of the training sessions we made available publicly that we did. So just an illustration of the risk approach, that obviously all of the awards that we won, we made it quite public as well. And finally, the 4th big chapter in our risk management journey is we don't have to forget, we have to remember the risk management team itself, because upgrading risk management team is a very, very important step in the journey. And it could be building up, hiring or educating and building quantitative skills. And again, I hope this is kind of comes across as clear as I wanted to. Qualitative risk management is not risk management. It's astrology. Quantitative risk management is only considered risk management. So I don't understand where this kind of idea comes from, that we do qualitative until we mature and then we do quantitative. It doesn't work like that. Qualitative risk management is not risk management. It's like, we're doing astrology until we're mature enough, and then we start doing astronomy, so basically physics and chemistry and math, and we're going to suddenly send men to space. It doesn't really work like that. These two things are not stages of maturity. They're just rubbish and not rubbish, and you can't choose one on Monday and then the other one on Tuesday. It's you have to play serious. So quantitative is kind of is a given. Like there's no dancing around it. If you don't have it, you have to hire someone who has it, and or you can outsource it. But you can't not do anything, because whatever else you do is just risk management one, and that's not real risk management. Soft skills, of course, are important, because quantifying risks is actually not as difficult as communicating the outputs of quantification of risks. And you do need good communicators and powerful people who can sell the risk messages to the other decision makers. And then, of course, the final skill that is super important is understanding the nature of the business, understanding the chemistry behind the products that your company is producing, understanding the logistical routes, understanding the basic, the kind of the technology used, why certain chemical plants are high risk versus other chemical plants that are lower risk. All of that is absolutely important, and that's why we joined like different chemical engineering associations, so we can learn and learn from other risk engineers. And we hired we're not hired, we outsourced, we consulted in risk engineers who would teach us about certain risks within the production plants when we started looking at operational risk. And I hired ex-insurance guys when I was given a task to investigate and fix the insurance. I immediately, like literally the next day, I hired an insurance genius who was upskilling me on the products and the markets, which was hilarious because he brought in all of the biases from the industry, and his perception changed completely, like 100%. All of his ideas, his initial hypothesis that he was saying, we've actually proven incorrect, because his hypotheses were the same as the market hypothesis, and we've proven them wrong time after time, and we completely changed kind of the perception of the market. And the second last message, risk management too requires tools. You really want to automate risk management one if possible, and this is a screenshot from Archer Insight that allows you to turn any risk register into a quantitative risk register and quantify it very simply. And you also want to invest in proper modeling tools. So make sure you catch my first workshop last Monday at the Risk Awareness Week. To catch, when I say catch, it means go to the website, click on watch the workshops, and watch the replay of that workshop. When I talk about 3 levels of risk analysis, and when I illustrate how you can get some of the value from the basic level, how you then create bow ties, quantitative bow ties, and that gives you additional insights, and how you build purpose-built models, like specifically, and you can now all do that in the same software package. So automating helps a lot. The good news is it pays for itself. You can save so much money on a single automation of risk analysis that your licenses are kind of paid for eternity. And in my mind, it's really a no-brainer. And then I think this is the final kind of message is networking and learning from others should be really a big part of risk management team development, because risk management too is not new. You're not starting from scratch. You don't have to recreate the wheel. Quantitative risk analysis have been done by people who have been on top of the game for decades. Some of the methodologies are the same as people used in Second World War. Some of the methodologies are the same as insurance companies used in 16th century and 17th century. So all very old things. If you don't have an answer for something, it doesn't mean that the problem is unsolvable. It just means you need to find somebody who has the answer, because there are answers for most of the problems out there. Me and Sam Savage, who is also a speaker at the Risk Awareness Week, me and Sam Savage actually did a session. Like, we did a whole series of webcasts. We have 10 webcasts on the YouTube channel, on the Risk Academy YouTube channel. Let me post it. I do encourage everybody to sign up for that. On the Risk Academy YouTube channel, me and Sam Savage there's a playlist called sorry, Chance Talk, and in that webcast we go through one by one 10 risk management myths and excuses, he calls it lame excuses, that Sam and Doug Hubbard came up, and they're called 10 lame excuses for not quantifying risks. And we actually destroy every single one of them, because most of the things that are circulating in your brain, you think, oh, well, this is an issue, like we don't have enough data, our data is not quality, how do we represent a model, our situation is too complex, how do we model tail events, like all of this has been solved decades ago. All you need to do is just find people who've done it and ask them how they've done it. And Risk Awareness Week is this perfect environment where you can communicate with the other risk professionals, because the only kind of the fundamental reason behind why I created Risk Awareness Week is I wanted to separate Risk Management 1 from Risk Management 2. So Risk Awareness Week only has Risk Management 2, and this is very important to separate and identify Risk Management 1 events and Risk Management 1 speakers, because 3 minutes into the conversation, it has to be pretty clear to you that this has zero practical value and it's just all hypothetical, theoretical, academic nonsense. And you can continue if it's fun, but don't try it, apply it at work, because you'll waste your time and you actually jeopardize your career. Most of the Risk Management 1 ideas, frameworks, methodologies, ERM, COSO, all of the suggestions that they do, if you do them in your work, you will get fired, or you will stay in your kind of low paying, low respect role, and risk will be seen as this afterthought. Why do it? It's such a waste. And have fun doing risk management. I think I'm just under an hour and a half, and this is really everything that I wanted to share. Ask questions. I'll stay online for a bit to answer your questions. Maybe there's a topic that I didn't cover, I forgot to cover, and you want me to talk about that. Obviously, I've tried and tested many of the things you can think of in risk management, so I may have a story on the topic that you're interested. And if I don't, I'll find the person who does, because one of the Risk Awareness Week speakers bound to have that experience. By the way, I just did that for a friend of mine in the Middle East. She was asking for an expert who did quantitative risk analysis for the purposes of optimizing asset performance and asset maintenance. And I found 3 of the speakers that have actually done that in different parts of the world, in Australia, in US, and in a different part of US. So I'll connect them, and then they can learn from one another. All right, have fun. And if you're not having fun, if you're just doing Risk Management 1, might as well look for a better job, because there are places that really appreciate and support good decision making. You don't need to be stuck in updating your quarterly risk register, because such a shameful waste of effort for a risk professional. We can and should do better. All right, thank you very much for listening. Any questions, please ask away if you have anything else that I haven't responded yet to.